People of different races are all over America, but how does their race affect their academic and job success? Who gets higher test scores? Who gets hired more often? Why is this? If you look back at the early 1900s, pretty much the only people who got jobs were whites, but that has obviously changed. But it hasn't changed completely. According to Nancy D'Atomoso, author of the new book, The American Non-Dilemma, Racial Inequality Without Racism, whites get hired more often than African Americans. She quotes, "It's easy to believe the worst is over in an economic downturn, but for African Americans, the pain continues. Over 13% of black workers are unemployed, nearly twice the national average. And that's not a new development. Regardless of the economy, job prospects for African Americans have long been significantly worse than for the country as a whole." Now I think the most obvious explanation for the situation is racial discrimination, but in my research I have found a somewhat different problem: favoritism. Getting an inside edge by using help from family and friends is a powerful force which causes inequality in the United States. Though they are unaware of it most of the time, white Americans tend to help other white Americans more than they help African Americans without even thinking they could be wronging them. If African Americans are not given equal chances, they will continue to have a harder time finding decent jobs. As we move along in the future, I am guessing that the ratio of employed whites and blacks will even out. In the recent past, we have seen the relationship between whites and blacks grow closer, and because of this, the ratio of employed whites and blacks has come closer to even. So I believe the same will continue to happen in the near future. A solution to this problem would be to make sure that bosses are hiring the right person to do the job, not according to their race, but who is the best person to get the job done. Now on to academic success. According to Christopher Jenkins, African Americans have lower test scores on average. He quotes, "African Americans currently score lower than European Americans on vocabulary, reading, and mathematics tests, as well on tests that claim to measure education aptitude and intelligence. This gap appears before children enter kindergarten and it continues into adulthood. It has narrowed since 1970, but a typical black American still scores below 75% of white Americans on most tests. On some tests, the typical black American scores below more than 85% of whites. I believe the black-white test score gap is not because whites are smarter than blacks. It is true that the gap shrinks only little when black and white children attend the same schools. It is also true that the gap shrinks only little when black and white families have the same amount of schooling, the same income, and the same wealth. But despite endless speculation, no one has found genetic evidence that whites are just smarter than blacks. The real reason why whites have higher test scores than blacks is still somewhat of a mystery. Now, a solution to this problem would be for the teachers and the school board to examine themselves and make sure they are treating everyone in their school the same. They need to make sure they are giving equal opportunities to everybody. In conclusion, still today, African Americans are not given the same opportunities as whites. If we want African Americans to get the same opportunities as whites, then we need bosses to make sure that they are hiring just as many African Americans as they are as whites. And we need teachers to make sure that they are giving the same opportunities to white and black students.